Good morning, everyone. Please rise. Today we will sing the hymn number 11, I Will Sing of the Mercies of the Lord, which is printed on your hymn book, page 28 to 29. Let's sing stanza 1 and 2 once. Today's scripture is taken from Psalms chapter 95, verses 1 to 3, which is printed on your hymn book, page 6, item number 7. Please listen to God's word. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. Psalms chapter 95, verses 1 to 3. Let's read it together. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. Psalms chapter 95, verses 1 to 3. Let's bow and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we praise your faithfulness and mercy. We will sing of the mercies of the Lord because of your unfailing love, kindness, and blessings. Lord, please always guide us when we feel lost. Grant us peace when we have fear and live inside our heart. Lord, bless the evangelical meetings on Thursday and Friday. Open our eyes and heart so that we can experience you. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Please be seated.
Good morning, everyone. This morning we got a book talk and offered by Professor Gordon Matthews, an anthropologist from the CUHK. He's getting ready, and before that, I would like you to look at a very short clip about a very special place in Hong Kong, is the Chongqing Mansions. Do you know the Chinese? What's that, guys? What's that? Can't hear you. Do you know that place in Tsim Sha Tsui? Can you shout out? What is the Chinese name for that place? Huh? Yeah, exactly, Chongqing Daihao. So why this place is so special, and then why we have invited an anthropologist to come and talk about this place. So you'll find out very soon. But before that, I would like you to look at a very short video clip about this very special place in Hong Kong. Actually, how many of you have been there? Have you ever got the chance to visit that building, that very famous in a sense? among tourists? No one? Surprised. Actually, I myself haven't visited it, okay? So let's quickly have a brief idea what we are going to listen to today. Hopefully the volume is okay.
有啲人夜晚黑睇我哋嘅大廈出邊咁麼，個門口個景啊，即係講話，哎呀，重慶大廈好靚啊！當時我點解會提議咁麼，裝 LED 燈咁麼咁靚？我想有一個概念啊，永葆青春。我係1979年嚟香港。 從88年嚟到重慶大廈，開始買第一間物業啊。那麼我一直都係做賓館。我93年開始重慶大廈呢就業主選我做主席。 因為當年啊，重慶大廈曾經呢發生過一個重大嘅事情，就係火牛房嗰個電嘅負荷超出供應，結果爆炸，成個牛房呢停咗10日10夜，冇電，成個大廈。那麼當時呢，我好積極嘅參與呢個工作啊，去幫手呢籌備啦，跟政府聯手啊嘛。 起一個火牛房，當年啊，呢個事情完成咗以後，彭定康咪嚟呢度視察噶嘛。咁啊，以前我哋嘅大廈係俾人哋稱為一個九反之地，啊，龍蛇鳳雜。你去睇嗰個王家衛啊，都拍嚟一部電影講。 重慶森林，我當時就好努力想將呢個重慶大廈將佢改變過嚟。我哋而家呢，日頭、中班、夜班24小時都有咁。另外一個，你睇我成個重慶大廈，而家加埋咧，應該重慶大廈有400幾部閉路電視。 嗰個和諧都好緊要。重慶大廈唔係單單中國人，係嘛？仲有南亞裔啊，有啲非洲啊等等啊。我覺得啊，重慶大廈咧，的確好似一個小小嘅城市，嗱都好似香港咁啊！香港咪係世界各地嘅人啊嘛，重慶大廈咧亦係世界各地嘅人。 我都期望講，重慶大廈會成為全香港最出色嘅大廈。
Hopefully, with this very short video clip, you have more idea how the place looked like. And then now I hand over the time to our MCs today.
Good morning, teachers, fellows. It's our honor to have invited Professor Gordon Matthews of the Chinese University of Hong Kong to give us a book talk today.
Professor Matthews is a professor of the Faculty of Anthropology. His major research interests are meanings of life, culture and identity, law and globalization, asylum seekers, and life after death.
Professor Matthews has written and edited a number of books based on his research interest, namely Pursuits of Happiness, Well-being in Anthropological Perspective, Hong Kong, China, Learning to Belong to a Nation, Ghetto at the Center of the World, and his newly published work, The World in Guangzhou, Africans, and other foreigners in South China's global marketplace.
Before the book talk, may we invite our Vice Principal, Mr. Yu, to present a souvenir to Professor Matthews. Professor Matthews and Mr. Yu, please. Thank you. Now we pass the mic to Professor Matthews.
Okay, you've already seen a video about Chungking Mansions, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the building. How many of you have been to Chungking Mansions? Raise your hand. Oh, most of you have not, so you should go tonight, or tomorrow, or Saturday, or Sunday. That's very important so that you can see what the building looks like, okay? And you can talk to people there, because you can learn a great deal from talking to people who don't look like you. Now, Chungking Mansions is a building that many people in Hong Kong are quite afraid of. Your parents will probably tell you, don't go to that building. It's dangerous. But that's not really true. If you were to go, many people would probably want to talk to you. They'd be very interested in who you are, and you could ask them questions about who they are. Where are you from? You know, what do people eat for breakfast in your country? Why did you come to Hong Kong? Lots of questions to ask. People are happy to talk. So don't be shy. That's what you need to do. Now, Chungking Mansions, to speak a little more intellectually, is an ethnic ghetto. That's where you find Africans, that's where you find South Asians, that's where you find people from many different countries in Hong Kong who are poor. There are two kinds of foreigners in Hong Kong. There are rich people who look like me, white people who are in places like Lam Kwai Fong and Central, and there are poor people who come from developing world countries. They don't have the money to be in rich places for the most part, so their home is Chungking Mansions. And if you go into Chungking Mansions, you could see many, many Indian grocery stores, Pakistani restaurants. You can hear music from India, mosque music from Islam. You can hear and see and smell a whole different world from what the rest of Hong Kong looks like. Now, I am an anthropologist, and you should have received, or you will be receiving, a sheet about what anthropology is. That was sent you. I think that was sent. You may have that. Okay. What an anthropologist does is different from what people do who are studying a different matter. What an anthropologist does is go and live with people. If you're a sociologist, you'd go to Chungking Mansions and give people a questionnaire. Fill this out, and then you'd leave. But if you're an anthropologist, you go in and you talk to people. And you go in again and again and again and again and again. I was in Chungking Mansions for 4 years, talking to people every weekend and most evenings, getting to know people, making friends with them, finding out what their lives are like. And it's fascinating to do this because you can really get to know people who are different from you. That's what I was able to do as an anthropologist, and it was very exciting. Now, why does this building exist? It was first built in 1962. And at that time, it was thought to be luxurious. That's where movie actors lived, for example, and movie actresses. However, very rapidly it began to fall apart. And by 1970, it was where many sex workers were for American servicemen coming from the Vietnam War. In the middle of the 1970s, you had the hippie revolution, with lots of people, Westerners and Japanese with long hair traveling around Asia and looking for a cheap place to stay. Chungking Mansions was that place. And so for 10 or 15 years, Chungking Mansions was where all these hippies went, smoking marijuana often. Then, in the 1990s, the building changed again. It became where lots of South Asians and Africans came to work for cheap wages and also to go to China, because China in the 2000s began to be the manufacturing center of the world. And so anybody who wanted to buy cheap phones or cheap clothing or cheap watches, cheap computers for their home country would go to Chungking Mansions and then buy China-made goods and send them back home. And that became the whole industry of Chungking Mansions. That still goes on today, but now less, because many more merchants and traders go into Guangzhou and they trade in China instead. However, Chungking Mansions is still very, very famous for all kinds of people coming in from around the world to stay there cheaply. And the guest houses are among the cheapest in Hong Kong. You can stay in a guest house in Chungking Mansions for $150 a night. There's nowhere else in Hong Kong you can stay in a guest house. I have stayed in every guest house in Chungking Mansions. They're nice places. Send your friends to stay there. I'm serious. Okay? Now, one interesting matter about the building is it has the ground floor and the first floor, which is where many of the shops are. Many, many restaurants, many, many phone stores, many, many clothing stores, and then 3 different towers rise up. What this means is that it's very easy to hide in Chungking Mansions. If I'm a bad guy, or if the police want me, all I have to do is go up the elevator in C block. And the police can't catch me unless they go up that elevator. If they go up the A block elevator or the E block elevator, they will never find me. And so that's why in Chungking Mansions, there's not a whole lot of illegal stuff going on, but a little bit is, because it's so easy to hide from police. Many of my friends in Chungking Mansions are working illegally because they're asylum seekers or they're tourists. But the police can't catch them. Because let's say they're in the 10th floor working at a guest house and a friend calls them, hey, the police are coming. Okay, the police are coming. Okay, I'll just walk away. And the police come and you say, hi, and the police don't know what you're doing. So the building is very easy to escape in because of its architecture. This doesn't mean that terrible things go on there. No, they don't. But it does mean that there are people who are doing things that are subtly illegal, like working illegally. Now, who are the people in Chungking Mansions? Well, there's a bunch of different types of people. When I go to the owner's dinner of Chungking Mansions, mostly it's old mainland Chinese, because they bought places in Chungking Mansions that were the only real estate in Hong Kong they could afford, because it's cheap to buy places there. But you never see them in Chungking Mansions. Then you also have lots of different managers, mostly Pakistani or Indian. And they don't have the money to buy a place, but they manage a business. Many of them have lived in Hong Kong for generations. They might be more Hong Konger than you are, simply because your families may have become recently, but they've been in Hong Kong since 1870, some of them. And many times their Cantonese is extremely good. You know, they can speak Cantonese fluently, but many of them come to Chungking Mansions to stay and work because they say Hong Kong is racist. They say that many Chinese people look at a South Asian and think, oh, that guy, he's no good. So Chungking Mansions, they can feel more at home, like that's a place that they belong to. Now, there also are many temporary workers. many people who are going back to India or Pakistan once every 42 days to go home. But in Hong Kong, even if they wash dishes, they can make more money than they can back in India or Pakistan. A very good friend of mine has a wife who is a secondary school teacher, like your teachers, in Kolkata, India. But in Hong Kong, where he mops the floor, he makes more money than she can make as a secondary school teacher in India. So of course he comes to Hong Kong. And he has to go back home every 42 days, but this is how he supports his family. I went back to India and went to his sister's wedding. He bought a new motorcycle. He rebuilt the family house, all with the money he makes in Hong Kong. And so he's a very good helper and citizen for his family. You know, he helps his family greatly because he can work in Hong Kong. Now, another group in Chungking Mansions are asylum seekers. And asylum seekers are really interesting because they're people who came to Hong Kong to flee their home countries, often because they were persecuted. Many of them are from India, Pakistan, others from Africa, and Hong Kong government hates asylum seekers. The Hong Kong government won't allow them to work, but will give them a tiny bit of money, about $1,500 in rent and $500 in food aid, and it says don't work, but you can't live on that money. So asylum seekers are forced to work. Even now, I teach a class in Chungking Mansions every Saturday. I teach a class of asylum seekers, and we talk about current events. If any of you want to go to the class, email me. You're welcome to come. Not everybody, but a few people can come if you want. It's very, very interesting because these asylum seekers are smarter than most students at Chinese University. They really know a lot about the world, but they can't work in Hong Kong, and they're in great danger because the police can arrest them. And I do all I can to help my asylum seeker friends somehow have a better life in Hong Kong, but it's very, very difficult for them. I think these asylum seekers, the ones I know, should be coming to schools like yours. I shouldn't be talking. I'm just one more white guy. But my asylum seeker friends, they can talk to you. They can tell you about life in their home countries, the things that happened to them. One good friend of mine was in Iran, and the Iranian government arrested him for anti-government activities, and they put him in a tiny cage, and they left him there for 6 months, and they tortured him. So of course he has great problems in his head, but he's brilliant. I wish he could teach at my university. Other asylum seekers I know have other stories of the things that have happened to them in their lives. Now, some asylum seekers probably are lying. They've probably come to Hong Kong to make more money. That may be true. But still, these people are often extremely able to help Hong Kong greatly. But the Hong Kong government hates them. It doesn't recognize most asylum seekers. It says, go back to your home country, but my friends, if they go back to their home country, may get killed. There's a story of a Somali guy who was sent back to his home country by the Hong Kong government 3 months ago. A week later, he was dead. Somebody pulled out a gun and shot him. What can we say? Why isn't Hong Kong more welcoming? But that's the situation we see, and many of these people are indeed in Chungking Mansions. Now, also, aside from this, there also are tourists. And many, many tourists come to Chungking Mansions because it's so cheap. You know, people want to go there just because it doesn't cost much money to stay. And many of them are deeply confused about Chungking Mansions. I remember one mainland Chinese woman said, "Hong Kong hai Jungguok, dimgai nido hai feijiao yana." Why are there Africans here in Chungking Mansions? And it was very funny. Sorry about my bad Cantonese, but that's what she said. And it was very interesting. She didn't understand what Chungking Mansions was. She thought Hong Kong is part of China, so everybody in Hong Kong must be Chinese. Other Chinese now come to Chungking Mansions and they really are interested. They want to find out more about what kind of place it is. Okay? So all of these different kinds of people are in Chungking Mansions, and it's fascinating to find out about them. Now, one more point briefly to make before I stop here, a couple of more points. You might ask why Chungking Mansions exists. And there are 3 reasons. One reason is because of China. China manufactures all kinds of goods for the developing world. China is the manufacturing center of low-end globalization, which is globalization for poor people. And this is true because China makes copy goods and knockoff goods. Somebody in Africa, somebody in South Asia can't afford a new iPhone. A new iPhone is hundreds of dollars, but they can afford a Chinese knockoff that might cost just $80 or $150. They can afford that. So that's what they buy. This is why Africa has many, many phones now. You know, it used to be 10 years ago that only 1 million Africans had smartphones. Today, 500 million Africans have smartphones because of Chinese copies and knockoffs. That's why. So China, without meaning to, is helping the entire world become globalized. That's the first reason why chunking mansions exist. The second reason is Hong Kong itself. Hong Kong has a very open visa situation, so that if you come from a country like Kenya, if you come from a country like India, you don't have to have a visa in advance. You can simply come to the airport and they'll let you in for 14 days or 30 days or 90 days. Because of Hong Kong's open visa system, many, many people can come in. Hong Kong does this because it wants tourists, but of course many people come and go straight to chunking mansions. Now, finally, chunking mansions exist because of the strange history of the building itself. Sometimes people say, why can't chunking mansions be torn down? And of course, you know that area. You've got K11, you've got I Square, all these expensive malls, but chunking mansions is not torn down because it is all of its different owners can make so much money there. You know, you've got 900 different ownership shares in the building, and those owners make a lot of money from the building. So a big real estate company like Chung Kong might come in and say, we want to buy chunking mansions. And the owners will say, no, I don't want to sell it. So that's why this building still exists, but it can't last forever. You know, it's an old building now, it's over 50 years old. Before too long, the building will probably be torn down, and Hong Kong will probably lose its main center of the developing world in this city. And that would be too bad. That would be deeply tragic, but it's going to happen at some point. So meanwhile, go to chunking mansions, and I really urge you to go. Maybe your liberal studies teacher can take you to chunking mansions. Many times I see secondary school students there with their teacher, looking around and talking to people. That's great, do it. Remember that if you travel around the world, if you travel to Kampala, if you travel to Karachi in Pakistan, if you travel to, Kampala in Uganda, and you say Hong Kong, the first thing people will mention to you is, oh, chunking mansions. You think of chunking mansions as someplace a little bit dangerous. They think of chunking mansions as a beacon of hope. That's where the world can really blossom. That's where you can go and make a better life for yourselves. So the people in chunking mansions are an awful lot like your own parents and grandparents. Your own parents and grandparents probably left China to come to Hong Kong to make a better life for themselves. The same thing is true of the people in chunking mansions. So you may look at them and think, oh, they're foreign, they're strange. No, they're not. You may speak a different language, but they're just like you. They're really not different. Remember that. And I urge all of you, go to chunking mansions. Even if you go only to have a bite to eat, go. Don't be afraid. Talk to people there. Now, if you're female, maybe go with a friend. I know, don't go alone, probably. But still, go to the building because it is a treasure to meet people very different from who you are. Okay, that's what I'll say, and I hope I have lots of questions. Thank you.
Any one of you have questions to ask Professor Matthews?
If I don't have questions within just a couple of minutes, I'll ask you some questions, but that's good. We have one. Okay.
Yeah, good morning, Professor Matthews. I would like to ask that why you're so interested in this place, because I think people may usually just, like what you have just mentioned, like saying, that you may think that that place is the place with some bad people, so you would not be interested, but why you have spent much time in it, and you really find that is a good place, and I'd like to know the reason that's why you start to feel like so.
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, to me, it's just interesting. And as an anthropologist, I always like to find interesting places and ask interesting questions. Anthropology is full of really interesting questions. Now, that's why, but even, you guys might think school is boring, but even you are very, very interesting. For example, let me ask you a personal question. What's your name? Pardon? Sophia. Now, my question when I first got to Hong Kong was, Sophia, but wait, Sophia, you're Hong Kong Chinese, aren't you? Why do you have a Western name? Sophia, you're not an English person. Why are you Sophia?
Because in this society we have different cultures, and so you need to let other people from other place to know you, and so you need a language that everyone understands.
Well, maybe, except Japanese don't have a different name. Japanese don't go by a Western name. Maybe it's what the mainland government says. Hong Kong people are colonized in their minds, and so they have Western names. Sorry, Sophia, I don't mean to bully you here or anything. But to me, that's the kind of question I asked as an anthropologist. And I might ask the similar question. Why do you wear uniforms? Well, you have to. Your teachers ask you to. But that's an interesting question, too. Many, many questions one can ask. And Sophia, back to you. My first paper that I wrote when I got to Hong Kong was about names. Why Hong Kong people have Western names. Very interesting. And there's a lot of complicated reasons, but it has to do with the nature of Hong Kong as a city. So, back to Chungking Mansions. I walked by Chungking Mansions and I thought, wow, there's all these Indian people here, all these African people here. Why are they here? What are they doing here? And I thought, I've got to find out. So I walked into Chungking Mansions and asked, why are you here? And they said, go away. Well, then I went back again and talked again and talked again. Eventually I found out. But that's the key to being an anthropologist, to be really curious about any kind of question you come to. And it makes it really, really exciting. Now, I'm going on too long, but let me briefly mention this. I've written books about many, many things. I wrote one earlier book about happiness across cultures. What does it mean to be happy? I did another book on the Japanese generation gap, because Japanese is my best foreign language. But why is it that young people don't want to be like their parents in Japan? I did another book about Hong Kong, learning to belong to a nation. Are Hong Kong people ever going to become Chinese or not? That's an interesting question. All of these are, to me, fascinating questions. Just to go back to that last question, if I ask an American, do you love your country? The American will say, oh, yes, of course I do. If I ask a Chinese, do you love your country? The Chinese will say, oh, yes, of course I do. If I ask a Hong Konger, do you love your country? What do you mean by country? And what do you mean by love? It's a different thing in Hong Kong. Very interesting. So all these are fascinating anthropological questions. And I've written a lot of books about a lot of different things. Chungking Mansions just seemed really interesting. And whatever's interesting, I want to study. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Hey, any other questions?
Professor Matthews.
Where are you?
Here.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to ask you, as you mentioned that the Chungking Mansion sells some fake phones or some electronic devices, but our world focuses on the intellectual property rights. So do you think that this kind of globalizations bring the good side or bad side?
Okay, that's a really good question. I actually wrote about this a couple of months ago for a piece on counterfeit goods, whether they're good or bad. That's a good question. I gave a talk like this at the Foreign Correspondents Club, and one guy in the audience got really angry He said, I work for Apple. And you talk about copies, that's disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself. That's what he told me. Later on, I had dinner with him because I wanted to find out, why do you think this way? Now, you're absolutely right. There are intellectual property rights. No question about it. You're also absolutely right that a company like Apple does spend a lot of money developing iPhone. But on the other hand, Apple is also the richest company in the world, I think. It makes so many profits. So is it a problem if we have knockoffs? Now, there's a difference in your question between knockoffs and copies. A copy is where you copy the original name. So if I have a copy iPhone, it looks like the real iPhone. That's a problem, I agree with you. That's stealing. But what if it's a knockoff taking the design but not using the original name? That's a knockoff, and that's a problem too. That's still stealing a bit, but not as bad as stealing the brand name. And most of the phones that go to Africa are knockoffs like this. Now, when are these knockoffs immoral? Medicines, yes. Counterfeit medicines kill people. You know, if you're diabetic and take insulin and the insulin doesn't work, you're going to die. Or penicillin because you have an infection and it doesn't work, you're going to die. That's a crime. But copy phones, yes, they're a problem, but not that much of a problem. And later on, I had a chance to talk to somebody working for Nokia, and she told me that they like knockoffs. Because somebody will buy a knockoff when they're 20 years old and think, wow, maybe later when I'm richer, I can buy the original. And so at 30, they buy the original. They buy the knockoff before they become wealthy because they can't afford it. So that's probably okay. Now, some merchants, I've traveled through Africa, and I've talked to various people who sell real phones, and they say, these knockoff phones are terrible because they're going to break often. They don't. I have owned a knockoff phone, and it was perfectly good for 3 years. Now, did it break earlier than the original? Yes. So I'm not saying that it's perfect, not at all. But they do work, and they bring globalization to the poor parts of the world. Because the bottom line is, here is what the world looks like. You've got the rich 15% of the world, 20% in America, in Hong Kong, in Japan, in Korea, in Western Europe, and they want to block themselves off from the poor part of the world. They don't want immigrants to come in, and they also want to make the poor parts of the world stay poor by having goods that are so expensive that poor people can't afford them. If you have knockoffs like China's making, then these poor people can indeed afford to get goods, and they can enter the world of globalization. One example I can give you of this, one final example that's really important. In Chungking Mansions, back 10 years ago, it used to be that many African traders were cheated because the Indians and Pakistanis knew the price of phones, and these African guys didn't have smartphones. Once they got smartphones, they could check on the price of phones in Kampala, in Nairobi, in Karachi, in Bombay. They could find out this global information, and they couldn't be cheated anymore. So that just shows the great importance of entering this global world. Is knockoffs and copies always good? No, there is a problem. My Apple detective friend, he's right. Still, I think that it's better to have knockoffs than not, simply because they do bring globalization to the world as a whole, and they make the world more equal in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is there any other questions?
Professor Matthews, I would like to know what are the reason why we Hong Kong people have those negative labeling or stereotyping towards those ethnic minorities in Hong Kong.
Where are
Thank
you?
you.
Where are you?
I'm here.
I can't see
Hello.
you all the way back.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. Okay,
Yes.
okay.
I would like to know what are the reasons that Hong Kong people have those negative labelings towards ethnic minorities in Hong Kong.
Now,
you.
that's a very interesting question. What's your name, by the way?
I'm Jessie.
Jesse, that's a very interesting question. Something strange has happened in Hong Kong. that it used to be that the asylum seekers I teach, the Africans and Indians and Pakistanis, Hong Kong people hated them. And acha, all that stuff, all the labels that would be given to ethnic minorities. But today, the most hated ethnic minority in Hong Kong is mainland Chinese. And that's not good necessarily, but that's the group that is most hated. So asylum seekers, like in my class, have become the new heroes, really. I remember being in my class with an activist Hong Konger, and an African guy said, "Can I be a Hong Konger?" And the activist said, "Of course you can. You could be a Hong Konger." And then I said, "Can I be a Hong Konger?" He said, "Of course you can be a Hong Konger." And then a mainland Chinese said, "Can I be a Hong Konger?" No. So it's very interesting what's happened. Why this prejudice? It's because of the mainland government. And frankly, we are all worried about what's happening to Hong Kong. I am too. If Article 23 passes, what's going to happen to Hong Kong? I mean, I'm quite worried if there is a loss of freedom of expression. And the recent correspondent, for example, being denied his visa, that's disgusting. That shouldn't have happened. Having said that, though, Hong Kong is a wonderful place, and I hope it can continue. Back to ethnic prejudice, I think people like your parents and grandparents probably felt more prejudice towards Africans and South Asians than many young people do today. I don't sense much prejudice among young people. Now, Jesse, if you had a boyfriend and he was African or Indian, your grandparents probably wouldn't be very happy. We know that. But having said that, still, there is a different feeling among young people. And many of the Indians, Pakistanis, and Africans I teach say it's completely different among young people. They don't feel this the way their elders do. This is a really, really, really important question in the end, because should Hong Kong be Chinese or should it be international? That's the fundamental question. And this is a question for you guys in your future. This is a really good secondary school. A lot of you will be future Hong Kong government workers or in important positions. What kind of city do you want Hong Kong to become? Do you want it to be a place where people who look like me, but not just me, because I'm a rich white guy, instead, people like Africans, people like Indians, people like Filipinos can make it their home? Or do you want it to be the way the Chinese government would look at Hong Kong, for Chinese people? Hong Kong is for Chinese. Now, it's not that one of these answers is wrong and another's right. Certainly a place like Japan is for Japanese. The mainland is for people who are Chinese. But this is a big question Hong Kong's going to face. What kind of city do you want this place to become? Now you have no power, but in 30 years you're going to have power. You're going to create the future of Hong Kong. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Matthews. Let's hope that through this talk you have more understanding about the work done by anthropologists.
And so now, once again, we thank Professor Matthews for giving us a spectacular talk. So, thank you. And may we invite Mr. Lok for dismissal, giving us the instructions.
Thank you. Great. Thanks.